Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Antron Watson. I work for AARP Massachusetts. Just want to give everybody a warm welcome and thank you for joining us for the Unpacking Affordable Homes Act. It's a real pleasure to have each of you joining us today to really embark on, this conversation and exploration of a really significant housing bill that's directly affecting all of us. To start, just give you a little bit about AARP. As you may already know, AARP has really been working to promote the health and well-being of older Americans for more than 60 years through information, advocacy, and resources. Part of that really includes helping to improve the places we live so we can all thrive regardless of age, ability, or background. Ultimately, our vision is for a future in which communities, urban, suburban, and rural, are great places for all, especially people 50 plus. Housing legislation, isn't just about laws and regulations. It's about the places we call home, the communities we build, and the future we envision. Today, we're fortunate to have one of my colleagues, Ryan Berard, to really take us through some of the key elements of this important bill. Throughout this presentation today, if you have questions, please use the Q&A feature. If you're on a computer, it's going to be across the bottom of your screen. It does say Q&A. If you're on a mobile device, an iPad or something of that sort, you may have to tap your screen to access that menu. But we'll keep track of your questions there. We'll make sure we leave plenty of time at the end to answer those questions for you. But without further ado, I'm honored to introduce our speaker, Ryan, who's really gonna, undoubtedly shed some light on the critical aspects of this bill. Ryan, over to you.
Thanks, Antron. Appreciate that. Very nice introduction, and I'll echo thanking folks for joining us here today. Housing is a hot topic these days, and this, quite frankly, is the piece of legislation at the moment that's going to have the most direct impact on housing in Massachusetts over the next 5 years, and it also features the most significant investment in housing ever presented to the legislature, a $4.1 billion housing bond bill. So with that, let me begin our presentation. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope folks can see that, and I'll get us started here. So first of all, the bill itself is called the Affordable Homes Act, and the Affordable Homes Act is bill number 4138 in the House of Massachusetts Representatives. So I'll do a quick background on what exactly how the bill came to be. So in Massachusetts, someone has to introduce the bill. In this case, the governor wrote and proposed this legislation, and the Joint Committee on Housing, which includes both the House members and the Senate members in Massachusetts, held a hearing on the bill in January, which featured over 250 folks testifying, including us at AARP Massachusetts, business interests, real estate developers and contractors, advocacy organizations, and residents who take an interest in the issue. The Housing Committee extended the period in which they can either report the bill out favorably or unfavorably until April 18th. It is a pretty comprehensive bill, and they're taking their time to parse through it. They'll eventually need to make a report, and that report can be favorable or unfavorable. And then the bill will either not move forward if it's unfavorable. If it is favorable, it will move into another committee, most likely the Ways and Means Committee, which deals with the most of, if not all of, the financial matters that come before the legislature. To actually become a law, the House of Representatives would have to vote and pass the bill. The Senate would have to vote and pass the bill. The versions would have to be the same, and then the governor would have to sign the bill. And all of this really has to happen before July 31st of this year. Almost all legislation in Massachusetts, and certainly all the really big pieces of legislation, are passed by July 31st before the legislature essentially finishes their formal session for the year. They could theoretically pass legislation afterwards, but it's pretty unlikely that that would happen. So really, that's the deadline we're looking at. Now, why does it matter? I think this is a little self-explanatory, but I want to show you some of the things in the bill that really make a difference. So first of all, we have concrete steps for the first time really that offer residents struggling to both keep a roof over their heads and to afford their homes an opportunity with new funding sources and additional resources. Folks who are in the 65 plus community, according to research, spend more than 50% of their income on rent if they're renters. And more than half of those people in that age group spend over 30%, which is viewed as the appropriate amount to be spending on your housing. That terminology around cash poor, house rich, house poor, cash rich. That's kind of what they mean when they talk about this. So, this is an issue that's obviously affecting older residents in Massachusetts. And to that end, the Gerontology Institute at UMass Boston found that Massachusetts has the highest rate of seniors living alone who cannot afford basic necessities at nearly 60%. And the increased burden of housing costs in the state is really what's driving that. So, what's in the actual bill? First and foremost, the AARP wants to, I think, illustrate this as the really most significant piece for us that we feel, because it's an issue that we've been working on for a very long time, and it's about accessory dwelling units. And the bill for the very first time would allow the creation and construction of accessory dwelling units by right. And what that means is if you are a homeowner, you would have the right to build an accessory dwelling unit or ADU, either attached or detached from your property, without having to deal with a lot of the cumbersome zoning regulations and, quite frankly, the extremely varied zoning regulations that exist across all of our 351 cities and towns. If you're unfamiliar with ADUs, some folks would call them small homes. They can either be attached to or separate from an existing property, and in single family zoned units. And that's significant because the zoning issues usually come up when we're talking about multi-family zoning versus single family zoning. So the bill kind of streamlines that process and makes it the same for every municipality. Developers often don't want to get into building out accessory dwelling units because a lot of the times they have to navigate all this municipal city and town red tape. The bill strips that all away and makes it uniform across the state. As I said, every property owner would have the right to build an ADU, and there's specified, regulations about the codes that you have to maintain. The structure could be no more than 900 square feet. It would have to obviously have the proper facilities within it and abide by all the regular housing codes, which is all spelled out in the bill. And then, quite frankly, these are one of our best tools for allowing older adults to stay in the communities that they've lived in their whole lives, which the vast majority of people who get pulled on that issue and who we talk to, that's what they want to do, rather than going into long-term care facilities or other options that can be extremely costly or are just not the preferred way that they want to age. And so the bill is estimated to be able to produce between 8,000 and 10,000 ADUs across the state of Massachusetts. And you can imagine, quite frankly, the boon that would be for people who either have an existing property that they'd like to build an ADU where maybe family members could live, or if there are, a son or a daughter who wants to be able to build an ADU for their parents or other older relatives to move into. This finally allows that option to become a reality without having to do this town by town across the entire state. There was a ton of very positive testimony in regards to this specific part of the bill at the Housing Committee hearing It was almost universal across the board, which, having done this work for a long time, I'll tell you is not the norm. But folks from every side of the aisle, every walk of life, every advocacy organization praised this as a very positive step in the right direction. And we certainly focused our testimony on it as well, and are excited that not only is there a lot of support externally, but it seems like the legislators in the House and the Senate are also very much on board with this provision. Next, I want to talk a little bit about what I guarantee is a very overlooked part of the bill, but is extremely important, especially when it comes to planning for the future. And that is the creation of a senior housing and age-friendly communities commission. The governor, when she first took office, one of her priorities was to not just talk about housing, but talk about livable communities in particular. And she reflected that by changing the Secretariat of Housing into the Secretariat of Housing and Livable Communities. And so this commission, I think, is a further commitment to that, and is long overdue. So it would create the commission, which would be made up of various stakeholders in the legislature and external stakeholders, of which AARP hopes to be one. And honestly, we want to be part of it because I feel, or we feel, that there's a lot that we can bring to the table, both in terms of existing research and leveraging our members' thoughts and opinions on what needs to be done to allow folks to be able to age in the communities that they have lived in their whole lives. So by 2050, folks 65 and over will outnumber children for the first time. Obviously, that's not that far down the road. We are in desperate need of long-term planning around the issue of aging, and it's been put on the back burner long enough that we're not at the tipping point just yet, but we're coming close. And so ensuring that people can age as they want in their communities is a huge priority of ours. And it's important that we not only listen to the voices of the community members who are, at times screaming at us to focus on this issue, but also make sure that it's put into plain language that the legislature can see, so that we can actually codify rules, regulations, and laws in Massachusetts to allow this to be possible. So this commission is a great first step in doing that. And as I said, we testified to the positivity of the creation of the commission, but also advocating for AARP to have a seat on that commission as well. Those are the two big things I wanted to highlight, but this is a pretty massive bill, as I said, a 5-year, $4.1 billion bond bill. As you might imagine, there are a number of other sections that I do want to touch on, just so you're aware, that we didn't necessarily focus our testimony on, but that AARP does support. First off, it really focuses on affordability, both in terms of new developments and allowing people who are currently either in residence, renting, or owning ways to make their housing more affordable for them. It's obviously something that gets talked about a lot, but it's not something that is addressed in any meaningful way under current law. This bill definitely takes a huge step towards creating more affordability. In terms of retrofits, so making a home that someone has lived in for a long time more accessible, for example, so that they can continue to age in place. There is new funding provided for in the legislation that would allow homeowners to be able to do that. The bill also funds programs for first-time homebuyers, and in particular, it focuses on multifamily and multi-generational housing, which is something that we've often pushed for, because we have over almost 800,000 people who are caregivers in Massachusetts. Obviously, the idea that you could be in very close proximity to an aging relative or an older child who you are providing care for makes life easier. And so creating those supports and, doing development with that kind of a mindset can go a long way to making a community more livable. Kind of related to that, the bill would create a blanket regulation for cities and towns that allows them, instead of having to have a 2/3 majority on their city or town council or town meeting, it would allow for a simple majority to create and approve inclusionary zoning, which would generate affordability within neighborhoods and make sure that people of various income levels, working, retired, on Social Security, receiving pensions, unemployed, would be able to live in the community together, not, creating the problem that we're currently seeing in a number of places, even communities that you wouldn't really think of as having the influx of folks pushing out existing residents. Um, it's happening honestly all across the state. So to be able to allow for more inclusionary zoning policies by simple majority would really go a long way towards the goal of livable communities. And finally, it will do a lot to help folks age in place, stay with their families, stay in their communities for really all of the reasons that I said before. And again, that's a huge priority, and it's something that folks point out as their preferred method of aging or desire when it comes to aging, rather than the alternatives. So that's always a focus of ours, listening to the voices of our membership when it comes to how they are choosing to age. So here's how you can actually participate and help support the legislation. If you don't know who your legislator is, there's a great tool on the masslegislature.gov website where you can find your legislator just by typing in your address, and it'll show you who your state rep and who your state senator are. And the link below that is actually to an action page that we created that it more or less works the same way, where you put your name, your address in, and it'll tell you who your legislators are, but it'll also pre-populate with an email to your legislators that you can send with one click of a button. I will make sure that these links get dropped in the chat. And if you have any questions, please fire away. Antron, I cannot see the questions, so if you would let me know.
Yeah, no, while you were going, there were some really good questions that came in. So we're actually going to go all the way back to ADUs. There was a question around that. Do you have to be a relative to move into an accessory dwelling unit?
Very good question. No. The short answer is no. Under the legislation as it exists right now, you do not have to be, either a close relative or distant relative. It could be, someone who wants to open their home to a family friend who's aging, or someone who they've cared for in some capacity, during their life. Furthermore, you can also use it as a rental property, and it could be a source of income for older adults as well, to offset or to add to their income from Social Security or pension and retirement. So no, the way that the legislation is written and how we support it is you do not need to be a relative.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. Another question that came in was, does the bill overlap with anything in the MBTA bill, where communities near the MBTA routes have to provide a specific number of affordable housing units?
So actually, those are two separate things. It's a very good question. There's obviously a lot in the news about that, the MBTA Communities Act right now. In terms of zoning, there's no overlap. It would, I guess, the only real similarity would be that there are parts of the housing bond bill that talk about multifamily housing, and then there's parts of the MBTA Communities Act that talk about multifamily housing. If the bond bill were to pass, I would imagine that cities and towns would look at their zoning practices or zoning plans for the future, and they would probably create a zoning plan if they were affected by the MBTA Communities Act regulations that was encompassing of both. But there's really no direct connection between the two, other than that they both do impact zoning in one way or another.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Another question that came in was around, so the 30% guideline for housing costs, does it only include rent and mortgage, or does it also include real estate taxes, heat, water, and sewer?
So the way that it's calculated nowadays is actually kind of backwards. It's an old way to calculate expenses, right? And a lot of it doesn't include things like water, sewer, electrical, gas. A lot of times it doesn't include, say, condo fees or mortgage insurance or homeowners insurance even. And the way it's a federal calculation for affordability, and it's sort of the best practice way to do it. But the formula, quite frankly, needs to be updated, because actually, if you used more comprehensive data, it should take into account, in my opinion, and a lot of other folks' opinion, things like how much you spend on groceries or medical expenses or things like that. And I think if you expanded the formula to include all those things, you would actually see that a lot of people who think that their home either rental or ownership situation is affordable would find that it's not as affordable as they think it is. And it hopefully, if you adapted this a new model for that on the federal level, it would actually open up people to a whole number of resources.
Great, 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 great. Another really good question that came in was around, there seems to be a lot of focus on staying, with your family. What about our single family households, or people that they maybe don't have families currently?
Yeah, so the good news on that front, I would say, is that it's not being uh, forgotten about, because there's actually another piece of legislation that the House has passed this year that would address a lot of the issues that folks who either don't have families or don't have the ability to live with their families could access new and improved resources. I believe the title of that bill is the Long-Term Care Improvement Act. And the House passed that bill. The Senate has yet to take it up. But it addresses a lot of the kind of the issues that single folks face that kind of get glossed over a lot of the times in the conversation around housing. For example, in-home care, it addresses issues around affordability in home care, ways to access that care, streamlining of access to wraparound services and resources that are already existing in the community, but that people have a hard time either accessing themselves, or they have to go out of their way to advocate for themselves, to the point of frustration, as I often hear from people. So this particular bill really focuses a lot on the current development of either the development that's already in progress or encouraging new development. But it does include, like I said, the retrofitting funds, both increases to existing programs and the creation of new programs to make, if you have, say, if you live alone in a home, well, the easiest example, right? You live in a home with stairs and you can't navigate the stairs. It creates, like I said, funds existing programs and creates new programs that can be accessed for folks to make their home more accessible to them. So that's one area that it does. And then another area, I think, in terms of the livable communities aspect of it, it focuses, that commission in particular, one of the reasons why we're so kind of adamant that we have a seat on that commission is because we obviously represent a huge number of older residents of Massachusetts. And it doesn't get factored into the legislative process enough of people who are on their own. And so I think bringing voice to that and making sure that those folks are represented at the table when the conversations around what are we going to do as we move, forward with this aging population, really is important and needs to be talked about more.
Wonderful. Now we have, I'd say maybe two more questions that were put in here that I thought really good. One around infrastructure. Is there anything in the bill around infrastructure, specifically septic, in our more rural communities, as well as sidewalks?
Yeah, so it doesn't address sidewalks specifically. The around septic, I would say, it not it doesn't call it out like, in any provision that I've identified. However, it does talk a lot about new construction and kind of the ways that the new standards and regulations for new construction. For existing construction, part of the retrofitting and accessibility improvements are that the funding for either, I believe there was a specific piece that was about being able to tie into city lines and things like that if it's available, but there wasn't a large focus, unfortunately, on the more rural communities, and that actually came up in the testimony at the hearing during the the Joint Committee on Housing. A lot of folks who testified from, in particular, Western Massachusetts, raised that there wasn't enough of a focus on the more rural communities, and I would say that there was an outsized number of people who brought that up. So what I anticipate is that as the committee works through this, and this is kind of where it's really important for folks to contact your legislators, because the more people who raise that issue, the more likely it is to be altered in the committee so that things can actually be done specifically to address the rural communities. They did spend a lot of time talking about communities' access to transfer fees, which is one of the more controversial parts of the bill, and we didn't weigh in on it ourselves. It would create local option transfer fees for real estate transactions that would help more rural communities, and in particular the communities down on the South Coast and the Cape that were very much in favor of it. So that was really kind of the crux of the focus on rural communities. But I think that in particular, reaching out to your legislators and kind of raising the concerns that you have as a rural homeowner or renter go a long way in making sure that every community is actually accounted for in the bill.
Awesome, and I think looking at the time, probably our last question here is, if you could talk a little bit more about how the bill is looking to reduce cost of living in Massachusetts.
Yeah. Yep. Sure. No, it's a good question. So it's sort of three pieces, I would say. According to the governor and the Secretary of Housing and Livable Communities, the bill, if fully enacted, would create 70,000 new units of housing. So they're tackling this from the idea of increasing supply can decrease overall cost, right? It's not necessarily a universally held belief. There are other ways of thinking about development, but I would say that there is some there to it. As we all know, it seems as though there just isn't enough to go around right now. So building more is essential, and focusing the development on affordable properties is incredibly important. That transfer fee, like I said, that we didn't weigh in on one way or the other, the funds that would be that local municipalities, cities, and towns were able to get from that transfer fee would be used specifically for either building more affordable housing or using the funds to update existing affordable housing units. And one thing that I didn't talk about is the bill does address public housing. It opens up the possibility of being eligible for various types of public housing to a larger number of people. It also includes a significant chunk of funding for modernization, updating, retrofitting of existing public housing supply. And it, at the end of the day, I think that there's probably no one thing that the state could do to make things more affordable. It's going to be a kind of an all-in-one approach. So, I mean, we firmly believe at AARP that the ADU piece is an extremely important avenue, and especially, as I said, because if folks want to build them, they'll have the right to build them, and they don't have to go to a relative. People can rent them out, and the cities and towns could stipulate that they have to be at an affordable rate. That's not addressed specifically in the bill, but it would create, like I said, 8,000 to 10,000 new potential affordable units. So it's not the end all be all of housing bills, but it definitely goes much further than anything else that the legislature has done to address the issue of housing supply and affordability. And it does do a lot, quite frankly, for the 50+ population, which is why we spent so much time, parsing it and weighing in on the various sections.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. I really appreciate this, really, taking the time to dive into this bill and really get us a little bit more of an understanding about it. Just a reminder to everyone here. One, thank you all for joining and wanting to learn more about this bill. I think it's something for us to remember is that, the impact of what we've heard today doesn't stop here. Taking the knowledge that we've gained today, let it fuel your commitment to housing advocacy, whether it's through community engagement, conversations with neighbors, or really supporting relevant initiatives. Your action matters. As you see in chat, we did put all the links for contacting your legislature. But most importantly, I want to call out the piece where we have our Mobilization Mondays. It's a new meeting that we've put out to really engage with you all more and hear more from you. Ryan, I don't know. Do you want to speak on that, Ryan?
Just briefly, yeah, it's a good opportunity for people who are interested in advocating, not just on housing, but on really all of the different areas that we weigh in on, which are vast and impossible for me to run down. But anything that is impacting the 50+ community, and there's quite a lot of bills that do that. There's quite a lot of regulations that do that, both on the federal and the state level. So the Mobilization Mondays idea is to have a 45-minute conversation once a month to talk about what's happening state, federal, local, and ways that you as an individual can both make your voice heard and also hopefully impact these things in a way that improves your situation and situation for folks across the Commonwealth.
And if people had questions that weren't answered, is there a way for them to reach out to us to maybe get those questions answered?
Yep, I'm going to put my email directly in the chat now so that people can reach out to me if you have questions. One of the ways that I always tell people to, one of the things I always tell people to do in terms of legislation is if you have a specific question, the Massachusetts legislature, it does make it easy to find the legislation. It's the first link that I posted in the chat. You can actually go into the bill. It's a searchable feature. You can look up basically anything you want within the text. If you have specific questions that we didn't get to today, please feel free to email me directly, and I'll be more than happy to answer them as best I can or find you the answers.
Awesome. Thank you all again for joining us. And